Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host, co-hosted by Brian London. Always a privilege to be with you. If you have not already, please subscribe on YouTube, SoundCloud, BitChute, whatever platform you may be on. We have a friend of Gold Newsletter and a friend of the New Orleans Investment Conference. Her name is Tracy Weslosky, and she is the CEO and founder of Inventa Capital. She's also a many decades long investor, entrepreneur, and someone we love to get on the show. So Tracy, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and just before we began recording, you mentioned maybe how can I put this? Still the benefits to doing your homework, to being an intelligent or educated investor, and that's been somewhat of your calling in recent decades. We live in an era of basically unprecedented information. Why do you fear this is not filtering down to the broader public, or is it just, why in an era of such accessible information are people not so much better informed?
Okay, well, thank you for having me on board here. We own 300 investor.coms, including Investor Talk, investorchannel.com, and we are completely committed to people like myself and audience members that go to the New Orleans Investment Conference, because as I mentioned to you, Fergus, Brian attracts some of the most intelligent investors, and we want to be there because we obviously want to know what's happening. Now, I think your question, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're asking is,
we live in an era of just unprecedented information, of availability, and yet at the same time we see even more volatile.
Yeah, how to cut through it. I mean, that's basically the issue that we have is so many people are out there paying for placement online. And what we have, for instance, is a very high Google rating. You want to go to Google News, not google.com, because google.com placement is usually paid for placement. Google News is where you go, where you're actually trying to capture the most interesting, latest, and cutting information. But yes, trying to differentiate authentic sources of great news is a big challenge out there for most investors, but it's simple. Find a place that you trust, and then you go back.
Tracy, kind of expanding on this, though, in all fairness, what you focus on, and you and your team have been absolute pioneers in the critical materials sector of, say, the junior mining market, and that's energy metals, battery metals, rare earths, et cetera, all under that umbrella of critical materials. And you've done a wonderful job of finding opportunities, getting them exposed, telling those stories, getting investors onto those stories early on. But it's a lot more complicated of a topic, of a subject. It takes a lot more education by the investor to really understand that. So in your sector, it's tough sledding, or tougher sledding than somebody who's just going to go and simply invest in a gold or a silver story.
Oh, I know, but it's so exciting. I mean, our stocks are up last year over 256% on average. And, we just did a investor talk this morning on scandium. And there's an example. We list in critical materials in the United States, scandium, separate from rare earths, when most of us deem scandium to be a rare earth. And the company that was presenting this morning, Brian, you would love this. I know you know this company. One of the investors said, "Hey, are you going to let Rio Tinto buy you?" And he says, "No, we're going head to head with Rio Tinto." And we're looking for these dark horses that are trying to provide North American sources so that we all win.
Feel free, Tracy, to drop names as you talk about these incredible opportunities you're coming across. So our audience has no problem in learning about them. But, I have a sometimes controversial view in the industry that it's harder for these associated markets, metals and minerals, et cetera, resource plays, resource stocks, to really get a whole lot of traction in the market unless there's an underlying gold, silver bull market in progress, because it's gold and silver that bring a lot of speculative investors to the junior mining game. And then they start searching elsewhere for the other opportunities. And we've seen things like uranium, rare earths, the base metals, et cetera, enjoy some attention once gold and silver have kind of plowed the field as beforehand. Do you find that to be true? I mean, lithium took off, I guess, in the middle of a gold bear market, but other than that, it seems to me that it's hard to get a real bull market going in these associated materials.
I think with all the information and the technology that's happening now, it's easier than ever if we work together. So let me give you an example. Brian, what is your favorite right now, gold or silver? I'm going to put you right on the spot.
Oh, it's like my children. How gold or silver? I like Empress Royalty right now. And I don't want to, that just pops to mind.
Okay, so gold
like
royalty?
Yeah.
Gold royalty place? Okay, so let me give you an example. And I know that you're going to love this, because we're going to give you something complimentary just to make our point from this podcast. So anyone listening to this podcast, you're like, I got to listen to the Gold Newsletter podcast. We're going to have you pick 20 companies in the royalty sector, okay? A gold royalty sector, and we're going to put them on our investor channel watch list. So what's going to happen is once a day at the end of the market, you're going to see your top 5 performers and the top 5 volume movers for it. Now, let me explain. So someone calls you and says, hey, I need to get involved with the critical material. Let's go back to scandium. It's the topic of the day. Or maybe, let's go with scandium. So you can say, check out the scandium watch list, and you can see if all this, if one of the stocks are moving or none of the stocks are moving, and then everyone gets interested in it, and then they start following it. The point is, you can actually move stocks. And I think the kids at Reddit have proven you can do that. Now, the challenge for us baby boomers and Gen X's, I'd like to say I'm a Gen Y, but that would be a lie. As Gen X's, is that we have to learn how to use this technology better. And we also have to learn to work with the younger generations who are tech savvy. And then we can do anything, including moving those gold explorations, moving those gold royalty companies. But I'll share that maybe in a blog. I'll follow up with a story on this in the future post podcast, and we'll set up a gold newsletter watch list. And I'll show you how this technology can work simply by tweeting once a day.
Okay, that sounds great. But you mentioned the younger set, and just anecdotally, I have seen a number of younger people, come to me and ask me, how do I get involved in lithium? Really excited about the lithium story. I think it's going to be something. How do I get involved? And I tell them, well, you're a few years too late, by the way. And I go to the list of lithium stocks that have been recommended in Gold Newsletter that are up, 4, 5, 8 times in value, and say, I like these companies, but that kind of opportunity is no longer really present in them because they've moved so much. And actually, I do end up recommending a royalty company to them in the space that hasn't moved nearly as much. And so they are looking for that. But what do you tell people if they're looking for, let's use lithium, but for plays in lithium, where do they find up and comers that aren't already at, a couple $100 million market caps?
Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with our first, head-to-head debate. I think you're completely wrong on lithium. I think the time to get in is now, personally. Mm-hmm. I do have to add the disclaimer, I'm not a licensed investment advisor, so if you lose money on lithium, I have too many lawyers in my life, okay? But we have a lithium watch list, which runs daily, which is following the top 20 junior lithium companies. So you can see actually which ones are moving, and then I would recommend, what I would do is check out the ones that are the top 5 performers of the day. Throw one into your battery material mix and buy one. But yeah, no, I think we cannot meet the obligations for the EV car demand that is currently in place, and we need more We're not going to be able to have this super cycle everyone says we're going to be able to have because we don't have enough lithium. Period. This is still a rising bull market, Brian, or at least I'm going to throw my, who knows?
I certainly appreciate that. And there's so many, it's such an emotional game, the junior mining sector. So when you have these stocks that have gone up, multiplied in price, it's hard to say, well, yeah, it's going to do that again. But I would love to see that list. Tweet something out to me, and I'll try and get you some exposure on those as well.
Well, thank you for that. We run it behind the scenes. Like if you look up lithium watch list, rare earth watch list, we're all over Google, all over like 1 through 20. But we're purposely not doing, forgive me, any PR on it right now because we're a couple of weeks away from a new level of technology. It's all video driven. It's all meant to be exciting for our younger generation so they can say, hey, we hate your music, or, you need to speed up your information. But yes, we're happy to do that for you.
So it's going to be like the old curmudgeon, get off my lawn and buy lithium now.
Well, it's not just lithium, it's graphite, it's rare earths, it's anything with neodymium, for heaven's sakes. I mean, we don't have enough magnet materials. The rumor about speaking of Magna International with Apple cars, for instance, Jack Lipton, we have the top tech metals expert in the world on Investor Intel writing a regular column, and he's telling me, graphite, he's telling me silver, that'll make you happy. There you go, Brian.
Yeah. I think monetary demand is going to wipe out all the other factors, overwhelm all the other factors for silver, but every little bit helps. But that's fantastic, Tracy. You have been, again, the pioneer in the sector. And that sounds like a treasure trove of information. I completely agree with the mega trends at play. I really do.
I think we do a disservice, and no disrespect to you, Brian, but I think we do a disservice when we use the term resource. I mean, anyone who's young goes resource. I don't want to do resource. I want to do technology. And a lot of these new exploration companies or rising stars in the market aren't just, if you start doing research on them, you'll see that many of them have strategic partnerships with technology companies. They're buying technologies. They have new extraction processes. Rare earths alone, as we've explained over and over, is not a resource play, but a technology game. It's tech, and tech.
The Gold Newsletter is proudly sponsored by Inventa Capital Corporation, a venture capital advisory firm dedicated to the acquisition and development of assets in the natural resource sector. Today, Inventa is one of the premier mining groups with a first-rate portfolio of companies and a world-class team.
Hi, everyone. Brian London back with this week's CEO interview, in which we interview the CEO of one of the companies in the Inventa Capital Corp group. Inventa Capital Group is the sponsor of the Gold Newsletter podcast. And this week, we welcome back Charles Funk, CEO of Heliostar Metals. Heliostar, symbol HSTR on the Toronto Venture Exchange, is a wonderful company. We recommended it in Gold Newsletter. And I recommended it because, Charles, your project, the Unger project, in the extreme southwestern region of Alaska, is one that I've watched for a number of years, but have been somewhat frustrated and never really recommended the companies that had it before because they didn't have they weren't able to approach it in a holistic manner of exploration. Heliostar, under your guidance, has raised a good bit of money, is doing that right now. And let's talk briefly about that and how you're understanding the geology on a number of targets and are now being able to really focus in and hit your targets in your drill programs.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. We've talked in our previous conversations about the trying to show the full district scale of Unger, which previous operators might not have done. Previous geologists who've been on the project have compared this to Comstock or Guanajuato or Cerro Moro, some of the big intermediate sulfidation fields of the world. And our program last year started to show that. We've got open intersections at SH1, at Aquila, and at Apollo. And you mentioned that temperate nature. So we're building camp, we'll be drilling in a couple of days with 3 drill rigs now showing that much bigger scale. And that's going to be our focus this summer.
Yeah, and it's an incredible project. It's not just exploration. You have an existing resource of a few 100,000 ounces of extraordinarily high grade material. And you can begin working there earlier than a lot of other companies or projects in the northern latitudes. So that's an advantage. Another key advantage that's coming into light, and one we failed to talk about in our last conversation, is that you have a couple of projects in Mexico. And as the VP exploration for Vizsla Silver, you're used to really high silver grades, extraordinarily high silver grades. You're actually getting some wonderful silver sampling results from one of your projects in Mexico where you're mobilizing right now. So let's talk about that, because I think that's really exciting, and by the fact that you can get results from Mexico really year round.
Yeah, so we've got a really attractive portfolio in Sonora, Mexico, of 3 earlier stage projects. We put them together last year because each of them could be a standalone district. It's a bias that we have as a group to pick these districts that we think have a lot of potential. And that starts with the release we put out about 10 days ago on Kumro. Kumro is an interesting claim block. You know, we like to own big districts, as I mentioned. Kumro is sort of almost consider it the Pac-Man bite out of the El Picacho district. And the reason it's that kind of bite is that we were trying to acquire the whole district, but got comprehensively outbid by Silvercrest last year. They had a lot deeper pockets as a public company than we did as a private company. But nonetheless, the block of ground we've got is quite interesting. There's a whole series of veins to the west that on Silvercrest ground have some very high grades. I think the best hole they've drilled in February was 7 meters true width at 40 grams gold. And those veins trend directly onto our property. We're doing some mapping and sampling on those as we speak. But the interesting part about the district is it's in 2 halves, and the eastern part is a down-thrown block that preserves that mineralization a bit deeper. And so we did the first mapping and sampling at Kumro and got a really pleasant surprise. We got what we expected in a number of broad anomalies that we think are good targets to drill underneath, and that's what we were sort of expecting to get. But we also sampled a meter at 390 grams silver. And to get an ore grade intercept in the first program at surface in this eastern part of the block was pretty exciting. We think it really accelerates our target generation there as we move towards drilling.
Well, that's particularly exciting when you talk about the high grades trending onto your property. If they do trend at greater depths, that's really not that significant or really that much of a hindrance if you're talking about high grade, because that's exactly what you do in high grade situations. You go underground and follow the mineralization. And Mexico is famous for having this continuous, as you're finding and showing the market of Vizsla, having these high grade silver veins go on just essentially forever, being very consistent in other words. And historically, some of these projects, some of these veins have been mined for hundreds of years, and now are only now really getting modern exploration techniques applied to them.
Yeah, that's what we think as modern geologists, bringing that science. If it was outcropping at the level of the gold or silver, there's a fair chance that previous explorers or miners have been there and exploited that, and that's the bigger districts that you know of in Mexico. But you know, I'm sure a lot of your followers will be familiar with Mag Silver, where they recognize that not the gold and silver doesn't precipitate all through the vein. It has preferred parts of the vein. And you've got to use your skills to identify the minerals, the textures that tell you whether that could be to the left, to the right, down or up. And when you can recognize that, you can pick up ground very cheaply. And that's what we've done at Kumro. And then we look for the evidence to say that it is deeper. And there's certain things that convince our geologists of that. So the nice thing about Kumro, big district, you know that there's evidence of good widths and good grades on the Silvercrest side of the claim block. those veins trend directly onto our ground and have never been explored. And so we're just doing that systematic work because when you've got the advantage of knowing that it works just a bit over a kilometre away, it gives you huge confidence to explore your part of that district.
Well, just to sum up, you are completing an upsized private placement right now. You are fully funded to execute on these programs, both in Alaska and in Mexico. We'll be delivering a substantial news flow to the market, north and south, year round, and really an incredible proven management group, geological group. Couldn't be happier to have you as one of our sponsors of the podcast and as a recommended company in Gold Newsletter. Charles, thank you so much for visiting with us this week and giving us an update.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. We'll be busy with news.
Gosh, Tracy, I've actually just finished reading a book, Why Gold, Why Now by E.B. Tucker, one of our past guests. And he was actually concerned about encouraging people to go into the junior space, that it was too volatile, too unpredictable, and there was one point which he made, which you might want to push back on or address. He's concerned that too many people have inflated senses of their own capacity to decipher what will and will not be a high performer. And so that there's almost this exuberance for the junior space that he fears is unwarranted often, that people are too confident in their own capacity to decipher what is suitable.
Brian, you want to take that one on, or you want me to go for it?
Because you're the guest, go for it.
Okay, well, can I just say, I haven't read this particular book, and I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom in this book. I haven't read it. I do wonder where this person is from, because I can tell you right now, the junior space is completely undervalued, and I don't think there's anything inflated in the junior space at all.
Yeah, he's actually E.B. Tucker, and I don't want to get too sidetracked. It's been on my mind because I just finished this one. He has promoted the royalty companies as an alternative because he's concerned that unless you have real experience, you will be a sucker at the table. And maybe you want to.
Well, I love royalty companies, and now that I understand where you're going, I appreciate that. Yes, I mean, if you're brand new to the entire resource world, going into exploration is about, you certainly don't want to go, hey, here's an interesting exploration play, let's put 100% of my portfolio into it. The royalty investment strategy is exceedingly wise. Personally, I think it's exceedingly wise, especially if you're new. However, if you want to be a real pioneer and you want to go high risk and you want to go rogue, then pull up your sleeves, do your research, because it's easy enough to pick the winners. If you start looking at management, do your research, you start reading many of Brian's guests or some of the best newsletter writers in the world, don't necessarily listen to them, just listen, ask questions, do your research, meet the CEOs of the company, then make your investment decisions. But I think the entire resource exploration play is completely undervalued right now. I think we're going to see a massive M&A move over the next 5 years. It's going to be extraordinary, exciting, and everybody's going to say, wow, I wish I attended the New Orleans Investment Conference. And Brian, so help me God, I will be there this year, and that's a threat.
Don't stop now, Tracy. You're on a roll. I'll send the check is in the mail for all those kind words. But I couldn't agree with you more. I tell people all the time, and this is really in the basics, gold and silver and junior mining. When people want to get into gold and silver to protect their wealth from all these trends that we see happening, don't need to go into right now. They say, how do I get involved? And I say, okay, well, get our Investor's Guide to Gold and Silver. Everything is there. If you're going to get into mining stocks, it's an inefficient sector. You can use a little bit of skull sweat, time and effort, and some money subscribing to the best newsletters, going to the conferences. But you put in the work, you can gain an advantage over all the people who aren't willing to put in that work, and you can find the top performers. You get into the critical materials area, and you involve just a whole nother level of technology and research. And I think even greater inefficiencies that can be overcome, can be put to your advantage if you're willing to do the research. And that's what I tell people, don't take my word for it. Subscribe to 2 or 3 of the other newsletters out there that I recommend my friends and colleagues in the industry. Spend the money, spend the time, learn about it. And there are potentially enormous rewards that can come from doing that. And you're providing a great service right there, about to, I guess, unveil a whole new level of information for the investor willing to explore these areas.
Well, we hope so, but I just want to back up here and say, Brian, I wish someone had listened to this interview. I'm talking about myself 10 years ago. If I had gone to the New Orleans Investment Conference when I first met you, I don't know, 15 plus years ago, and instead of, hanging out at the parties, I had actually gone to each of the different speakers, taken notes like I do now at 50 plus years old, and actually cross-referenced, I would have learned a lot more. But the most important thing that I would like to add, if you don't mind, is the thing that most people don't know about your conference, for instance, is I went to one seminar one day, and it's called Turnaround. Forget the newsletter writers for a second. It's the investors that go there. Start talking to them. And I said to one investor, I knew he was worth a couple $100 million. I'm like, hey, what are you doing at this newsletter writer? I'd always dismissed him. You have everybody there, don't get me wrong. But you had one, and I'm like, well, he's not a very good speaker. I was younger. I'm like, he's not the most textural speaker. Okay, how's that? Am I staying politically correct here? And he says to me, you know what, Tracy? We follow this guy. We buy his newsletter because we find he's incorrect 85% of the time.
And
he said, we love him. It is so consistently wrong that we can almost bank on this guy. And he says, we think he's very bright. He just doesn't know how to call it. So we follow him for that reason. And I think it's that kind of out of the box thinking that separates many of us from the people who are worth several $100 million. And boy, they do their homework. They go in and they go to your conference every year and they write all their notes, and they do very well, very smart. And there's the other thing, probably if you talk less and you listen more, you're going to do really, really well. But your audience is full of knowledgeable historical members of this community, and it's the only event in the world you can go to where you can actually touch these people. Usually it's too big and you don't know who they are, but everybody in your audience has usually done quite well for themselves and are worth talking to.
I touch on that subject every year in my opening remarks. I tell them, you're going to be watching the stage, and we're going to do our level best to bring some of the top experts, smartest people in the world up here on the stage. But don't spend all of your time looking at the stage. Look around you. That audience really does contain some of the smartest, most successful, insightful investors out there who, by their very decision to come to that event, and of course, it's an incredible event. Not that easy to get to. It's down here in New Orleans. It's kind of it's like a destination event. Everybody loves to be in New Orleans, but there's an intellectual energy that permeates the halls, and just walking through the halls, bumping into the experts, but also bumping into these other very successful investors who are very willing to share their views. And I can't tell you how many tips that I get. I've changed my presentations a number of times just from the conversations I've had in the hall, and had new stock recommendations. And you can get a tip, and you can go in the exhibit hall and visit with the company and find them in the story, talk to management face to face. It's a really an irreplaceable opportunity. And I know there's a lot of investment events out there, and I don't mean to make this a commercial, but it is near and dear to my heart. And I appreciate you giving me the launching pad for it. But it is unique in the industry and very special, and we try to make it that way. It's a living, breathing thing. It's an experience. And, we're so happy to be back in person this year, because you can't get that kind of an experience virtually. You just can't replace that human interaction that we're going to get this year.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm coming down this year, and I'm coming down as an attendee. I simply want to be in the audience. I want to see all my associates. I want to ask them questions and do real due diligence and take it as a almost intellectual sabbatical, except a time to really listen and interact with some peers. This is a great place not only for understanding what's happening in the markets, but a lot of the people that are there are very politically aware, are global travelers. And, this is a global market. And these are important things to think about when you're making investments.
That's right. That's right, Tracy. It's much more than just investment. It's a community. And yeah, as you say, there's a lot of discussion of geopolitics, deeper topics. And I see actually from your bio that you're in Toronto. Is that correct?
I am, but I grew up a Southern girl in Tennessee. So I love going down to New Orleans and have family in Louisiana, and it's a beautiful place to visit. And again, but yes, I've been in Toronto now for almost 30 years.
Wow. And do you want to give a little bit of a plug for what Investor Intel is? So the website is just investorintel.com. And as you said, that leads into other related sites.
InvestorIntel.com is meant to be free, simple, and easy to use. Over the years, I've met numerous high net worth individuals, and they're like me. We don't like usernames and passwords. We don't want to be tracked and followed. So what we do is we attempt to be hire some of the best analysts in the world to just review stories that we find interesting, so that we can make investment decisions from a source that we can trust. So we're an investor source for information. And the Investor Talk and Investor Channel that I mentioned to you are all fed into that particular site. And, we're one of many really good sources that are out there that are trying to say, hey, this is real data written by top investors and analysts and individuals like the Jack Liftons, the Chris Thompsons, the Dean Bristows, the Frederick Kozaks. Some of the best analysts in the world write for Investor Intel, and they only write for us.
One metaphor that a finance professor shared with me, which I think relates to this discussion, was of basically some stocks winning the beauty pageant, these prominent tech stocks. And how do you persuade people to go for substance, which is what you're referring to, these very well-trained people, over what garners, it's almost like clickbait in terms of stocks?
Okay, that's an interesting question. But we don't listen to any of that. We attract a different kind of audience. Our audience actually knows what neodymium praseodymium magnet material is used for, and we were the first ones to cover graphene and how we could make F-35s go through radars without being detected. So I think we attract more of a geek investor, a high-end geek investor that is really interested in not just stories, but we're happy to see ESG stocks taking off, royalty stocks, as Brian touched on and alluded to, stocks that are going to fill out your portfolio, that are not only going to maintain their value, but they're going to increase. And then we like to spotlight stocks that we think have the potential just to break through. So for instance, this barium sulfate company that we were just talking to earlier this week, that's Voyager Pharmaceuticals. And speaking of Voyager, I took their call because I said, hey, we picked up Voyager at 95 cents. It's up 15,000%. And the reason we picked up Voyager, for instance, was because we knew Steve Ehrlich was going to be the founder of the company, and we go after management. Now, Voyager Pharmaceutical is barium sulfate. And I'll tell you, I didn't know what barium sulfate was. That's not my job. I knew it sounded interesting. And the FDA is just, there was just a big lawsuit that was just announced where barium sulfate is no longer a drug that has to be approved. It's now considered a medical device. We didn't know that the Chinese control all of the barium sulfate in the world and is only exporting 5%. And we didn't realize we had a big supply of it in Alberta. So we're like, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. So we're following the story. So it has rocket ship potential if the audience finds it interesting. And if, of course, they score the milestones that they say they're going to do and bring in the revenue, right? Right, Brian? Isn't that what we look for? Bottom lines,
That's
companies
exactly
exceeding
right.
expectations. Yes.
So Voyager Pharmaceutical has not yet gone up 15,000%, or has it already?
No, that one hasn't. The other Voyager has. That
Got
one
it.
we
Okay.
picked up in November. It's up 15,000% already. It's gone from less than $1 to $30.
Wow, interesting. So,
Yeah.
while we have you on this subject, then what are some of the big trends in critical materials that you see that investors should be aware of?
Well, you know what? If I had a large whiteboard behind me, we'd have dots all over it because we're trying to watch it right now. I just got off the phone call with Mark Chalmers from Energy Fuels. I'm sure you're friends with Mark, Brian, and we were talking about his rare earths,
Right, yeah.
deal that he just announced with Hyperion in Tennessee, of course, monazite deal, and how what they're doing. He says, I don't understand why people just see us, as uranium and a resource company. He says we're in rare earths and technology now too, and so trends. Here are the trends. More competitive investors out there. I think these Robin Hoods and Wealth Simples are fantastic. And if we can encourage people to say, hey, yes, we know you lost half of your money already because you didn't you didn't do any research, and you watched the commercials that said, hey, I'm 25 and I just became a billionaire and just bought my first jet. And instead attempted to really learn and understand that 15% back on your portfolio over a year is really substantial and better than some of the best investment advisors in North America. And we get people to step forward and learn more and attend events like the New Orleans Investment Conference and Mastermind and use Zoom. And then we're all going to win in a stronger public market, capital market, a more transparent market, a market where, as you were pointing out earlier, where it's not about the flash and crap, because that stuff doesn't last. I mean, I told the kid at the cannabis conference that said, hey, Trace, he said, I don't know what to do. I only made 24% last month. And then Brian, you know what I told him? I said, go buy a book on economic cycles, sell everything, and go take a vacation. Now, I was never invited back to any of those cannabis conferences after that one, but I felt that needed to be said. So if we can get people to go, okay, we care about our environment. So I think the clean tech and the ESG stocks and stories are going to continue to evolve. And Brian, your conference is fantastic for really responsible human beings, explaining the domino effect of their decision process. So you can not only invest, you can make money, and you can change the world. I was talking to an investor in Belgium this morning who's friends with one of the largest directors in the world. I said, hey, I saw him on an interview. He's doing whale talking, right? Whale watching right now. And he said, yeah, he's turned vegetarian and he invested in some of these new superfood companies. So making these types of investments, the superfoods is I think a large burgeoning market getting ready to explode as well. So you take a look at your lifestyle and you say, hey, what do I do? I care more about my lifestyle. I'm vegetarian this week. Well, maybe this, superfood is going to be better for me.
Right. Well, Tracy is also active on Twitter. Get following her. A lot of spice there. Brian, any final remarks before we let our guests go?
No, just that, Tracy, it's been a great pleasure. You are a pioneer in a lot of these emerging themes in the investment markets and mining stocks, and then really generalist investing as well. So really appreciate you being on. And please, let's work together some more. When you come up with the new website and the new services, let me know. We'll get it a lot of play, and tweet at me, tag me in some of your tweets exposing what you're doing, and I'd be glad to give it some more exposure out there. And thanks so much. It's exciting stuff, as always.
Well, we're definitely going to do a newsletter one. And Fergus, just as an aside, add me to your book reading club. Okay.
Okay. I'll
I want your recommendations because I need to be reading more.
No
Read
problem.
more.
People go to goldnewsletter.com/podcast for links to Tracy's work. And I'll put a link to that last book I've read in there as well for people to check out. So thank you. And I look forward to next time, Tracy. Cheers.
Thank you.